Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to, okay, another person coming in late, but,
Thank you.
welcome to Introduction to Politics. This is the first year BA course, which therefore means general course topic. I'm Clifford Bates, professor at Warsaw University, and been working at American Studies Center for a long time, so full-time colleague. Today is the introduction to the course. I've just handed out a syllabus. There's a sign-in sheet that's going around. Again, the course is very simple. If you look at the syllabus, the expectations of the course, the requirements, there will be quizzes. I will maybe announce them in the sense that I will warn you the next week. Quizzes are based upon knowledge of being up to date on your readings. So it does, unlike the great Polish tradition of waiting to the end of semester to cram for the test, it would be a good idea that every week before class you have prepared the reading. And the readings are specifically given out on this. And this will be a little annoying syllabus because you have to, if you just flipped it up, it'll be upside down. So just go droop like this, okay? Each week we have 15, we have technically 14, this semester, Wednesday has 17 class sessions, not including exam. Because this is not an exam course, we're not allowed to have the exam on the exam week. We technically have it on the last class. So I will plan to have the exam week on, technically our last class is June 15th. Okay, June 15th is the last scheduled class, is the 17th class. We'll probably have it on that class. That means 2 classes during the semester we're not going to have, our slot times. I'm probably going to put them near the holidays, okay? Because Wednesday, for some reason, okay, you know why there's 17 courses? You know why there is 17 classes this semester?
I think I know that because the professor at my Ogum told that there's a lot more Wednesdays than any other days in this.
Well, but you know why they have to do it this way? Because certain programs, certain departments, like social psychology and law, have by law a certain number, they have a year-long course. They have certain courses that are year-long. And they're required to have so many courses by law. So therefore, in case when there's a semester where one semester is only 12 weeks, that means, oh my God, there needs to be 30 class sessions. Therefore, if this only has 12 or 13, you have to make it up for the next semester. So they have to extend the next semester. So this is one of those weird rules that why the Warsaw University does strange things. We also doesn't have those kind of courses. We don't have our program, like law, social psychology, I think one more degree, engineering and physics have certain degrees because of accreditation requirements. They have this one course that is like a year long, and they have to have so many courses and so many things. We don't have something like that. We don't have a year-long course. We have only semester-long courses. This is an elective course. That means it's the first elective in the undergraduate, your undergraduate elective cycle. You've had, last semester, you had American government with Dr. Sklarski, correct, I think? And he would basically go over, I hope he's using the same text, because if he went back to the old text, I'll be disappointed. The text we put for the course was Analyzing American Politics, and that's a very good book because it introduces a lot of political science themes as well as about American institutions. And that is a very good introduction. Now, what this course is more general than what he did, because he mostly focused on the American institutions. What this course is about politics in general, about the basis of it, the logic of it, the foundations of it. Now, both in terms of in terms of anthropology, and also in terms of political ideas. So therefore, we'd be looking at a wide range of materials here. Everything is available for this course on campus. So if you have a campus account, I think you guys should be accessed to it. I hope I uploaded you guys in the system. Have you checked yet? Anyone checked?
Yeah.
Okay, all of the readings are completely available there. It's a giant folder with all the readings. And some readings, okay, I'm giving you hope. I mean, some of them are books, but that's because the books it's easier to do it. I could cut out, like the politics, I was tempted to cut out the chapters of the politics. Anyone signed this? Everyone signed this yet? Okay, could you pass it this way? I could have take the text and cut only book 1, book 3, book 4, 5 to 6, and then that's it, right? But I said, okay, keep the whole thing. So some things you're going to be doing it. I didn't give you the whole book of Philip Bobbitt because I had to scan it myself because the only thing that was available was a EDU book and EDU, but EDU. What do you call it? What is the word? It's that stupid. What's that suffix for books? Pub, P-U-B, EPUB. Only the EPUBs. And the problem with EPUBs or what's the other thing? It's called MIL or these eDoc books and these kind of things tend to have the pages tend to be like this, and they're not really the official pages of the book. The only thing and you have to be very careful, even if you see a PDF, you have to make sure it's a PDF of the actual book with the proper paging, not a PDF of an ebook, because the ebook pages do shift, and it becomes very difficult to cite. And you should be in your writing courses, right? In the writing courses, you should be being told about how to properly cite and refer, and you should always for a source, for a document, you should always use an edition, what they call the best edition available. That means always the printed book, a printed article. If you have an electronic version of it, always defer in reference to the printed version, okay? And even in a lot of things like EBSCO and things like that, they will give you the page that it's on. So even if you get a web thing, they'll tell you this really is on this page and that page. The problem with ebooks, they don't do that. So therefore, I had to make sure everything is from a book, and that was the Bobbitt book. I only wanted people to read, because the Bobbitt book's a monster book, 1,000-page long monster book. I only wanted people to look at the evolution of the nation, his account of how the concept of the state evolved, the evolutionary development of the state. From the princely state, his categories are like princely state, dynastic state, then territorial state, then state nation, and then last but not least, nation state. And then he talks about the rise of what he calls market states. Because the book is written around 1999, 2000, 2001. Paperback version came out 2000, 2001. The hardback came out 99, 90, 2000. About a decade, about the same time, about 8 years after Fukuyama's famous, when his book came out in 1992, 91, The End of History and The Last Man. Okay, so the 1990s was the time of the end of the nation state, right? The nation state was on its, and there was going to be something else. Either what Fukuyama, a student of Kojève, argued that the world state, there's going to be a homogeneous global state. Fukuyama didn't go that far. He would argue there'd be transnational globalism, the idea of transnational structures. And then there was the European project, which was what we could call a transnational political project, but it was within regional governments. So the idea of regional states, okay? But Bobbitt talked about what he called market states, the idea that he thought the market was going to replace the political structure. And what's so interesting about that is that therefore there's his evolution does a very good, his motto works very good to the rise of the nation state, but then he doesn't have an explanation of what's going to happen. And that the problem here is that what is the logic? And I think in many ways the logic that he does put forth would be regional states and then global states, right? Because the idea of the state being just a construct. We'll talk about that. That when we're talking about concepts like the state is the premier institution of politics, okay? The political, of human politics today. The state has been, but the state is not something that's always been. The state is a primarily modern concept. By modern, I mean around the beginning of modern thought. And the modern thought is when this basically starts with the rise of modern science, like Copernicus, Machiavelli. Machiavelli is probably the first modern political thinker in that sense. He rejects the older orders and wishes to make new orders. Then in science we have Descartes, people like Descartes. Then again we have someone like Hobbes, okay? So therefore what we have is modern thought. Modern thought embraces a new understanding of rationality. It embraces the rise of technological conquest, the idea of the conquest of nature, so Francis Bacon, and the idea of man's ability to conquest nature for the benefit of man. In other words, the conquest of nature for the benefits of man and the state. That's Francis Bacon. And the idea of science, the purpose of science is not knowledge. The purpose of science is to control our environment and to improve the human condition. Okay? So therefore, this is the whole modern project in a sense. It is as much a political project, and the state is in fact a concept created by Machiavelli, because the word stato, this meant condition, the condition of a thing. The lo stato was meant the condition or the status of a thing, and he turned it into speaking not about that, but rather he coined it to talk about the political form, the body politic. And that is why, and therefore this idea of the nation state, or the state first, becomes the basis of how we moderns understand political life. And the idea of how the state shapes and reshapes our political life. So this deals with it. So again, the requirement for the courses are straightforward. There are going to be quizzes, like I say, I will tend to announce them, I'll warn you, the previous class. They will be on the readings, the previous readings, so you should always be caught up in that sense. And the final exam is worth 60% of the final grade. So it's the quizzes are worth 40%. That should be around, I figure there should be 8 to 9, anywhere between. The least number of quizzes will be about 5, 6. The most 8 to 10. Okay, it depends on schedules and things like that. The quizzes are worth overall 40% of the grade. And trust me, the quiz. If you study for the quizzes, you will study for the final, because a lot of the kind of questions I asked on the quiz will be repeated on the final. Okay. This is an introduction course. There's not going to be essay writing. The rule we agreed on when we designed these the first year undergraduate courses was that there was not going to, you go into elective for the next course, next level, there'll be writing requirements. We didn't want to overwhelm new students with writing requirements, particularly with the rise of with the number of lectures you had. So we said, okay, we weren't going to have writing requirement. Now, I know some of my colleagues violate this rule. I don't. That's why it's only quizzes and a final. And if there's any writing in the final exam, it'll be mostly at most a paragraph, okay? Nothing more than that, nothing really extensive in that sense. The quizzes and tests will be very straightforward, either multiple choice true, false, simple, easy, kind of, and maybe I'll put it, I'll fill in the blank, like, I put something, what you have to write the definition of the word to fulfill the thing, okay? That's the kind of style of the quizzes, and that's going to be the majority of the test. It might be a shorter block question. You have to kind of fill in you have to explain something for at least a paragraph. But that will never be a quiz. That will be like for the final exam, okay? That's the expectation. And it's straightforward. It's a percentile grade system. So anything above a 90 is a 5, 80, usually the rule is 90s and above 5. If you get 100, 98, if you get a 98, 99, or 100, you get your explanation point, But your 90s and above is 5. 80s usually are 4 pluses. 70s. In other words, we want to. Technically, it is the cutting point off is 50 for the 3. Then it's the 3 above it is the 3 minus, so that's usually about in the 70s. And then there's the 8. We have that weird rule: 50s, 60s. We don't want it to be. It's not going to be perfectly like that because we don't want to make it too. We want to put a little bit of the 70s in into the lower 3, the 3 plus. Okay, so it will be kind of skewed like that a little bit. Simply for that reason. So that's it. So that it gets. In other words, it's that you can hit the passing mark, but in other words, you have to really not try to not pass. You can pass, but a DST is not. It's not the greatest grade. But if you're having problems or struggling, you can still pass in that sense because it's still at a 50, 60. That's the undergraduate level. Some people wanted to make it 60. I don't know what the rule is now. They're talking about this 50, 60. That's just this argument that's going on with the rector's office. But I know the BA programs are still at 50 for the first year. Some programs they move them up to 60. But that's neither here nor there. But with this class, I'll keep it at 50 for the sake of simplicity. All the readings are available again on the campus platform, and the thing there. Some readings are more tightened up in the sense that they're the article in question. I think there's one weird article. I mean, there is one article that's blurred. That is, there's an extra article attached to it. It's the it's the Pierre Menant piece on the contest of command. And I think there is an article by Minan about representation attached to it. And I'm not going to use the representation article, so I just didn't cut it out. At one time I used it. No, I kind of didn't use it this term. And there is something missing here. It's on here, right? If I'm correct. Yes. What's missing in the list, but it's in the book folder, is the Federalist Papers. And the reason for the Federalist Papers, you're not going to have to read all the Federalist Papers. I will put the number. I have the number someplace. I'll put the correction on to you guys. It's like 5 or 6 articles from the Federalist Papers, particularly number 10, 51, things about division of power, modern division of power, and why you have division of power. Okay. So that's why the Federalist Papers are there. You don't have to read all the Federalist Papers, but I gave you the Gideon edition of the Federalist Papers, so you have everything in stock there. There's a lot of reading, so therefore it is all sorted out and divided for you each week, what you're expecting here. Like this week, for the first class, Cons Lord's book, Modern Prince, chapters 1-3. Again, if it says Lord, okay. If it says Aristotle, it says Aristotle. I decided to include my book in here, the recent book, our 2016 book, only because you'll be reading 3 chapters of it, not a lot, not the whole thing, but I put it in the PDF of it in there simply by, because I felt it helped clarify things a little bit, particularly about the ancient order and the evolution of the state and the origins of things like the household tribe and things like that. So that's the reading, that's the expectation level, and that's that. Any questions on that? Yes?
There's the, as you said, the first reading is Lord chapters 1, 2, 3, and then there are things like the Prince chapter 1 to 5. So what's
The Prince is the Prince, Machiavelli's Prince. That's Machiavelli's Prince. The Lord is the modern Prince. It's a book that imitates the Prince, but it's a Khan's Lord, modern Prince. The other Prince, the Prince, that is Machiavelli. And that will probably be using, let me see, is it here? It's not in here. Oh my God, I didn't put the Prince in there. It's the Prince is there. It's the De Alvarez translation of the Prince. That's in the reading list. I know that's there. I had to find a new copy of it online, a new PDF that was much better than the previous PDF. So that is Machiavelli's Prince. So I apologize. That's why I left the Prince, okay?
And in the third class, I think there's sovereignty, so that's...
Oh, that is...
encyclopedia?
Yes, that's the Encyclopedia of Philosophy, the Sovereignty essay. That is the sovereignty essay. And I think in the PDF it'll say sovereignty. I think I maybe even put the Encyclopedia of Philosophy sovereignty on the campus volume of it. Again, the reading is shortened because I wanted to make it. I kind of wanted everything to fit on one page and not have 2 pages and things like this. So I kind of use abbreviations just to simplify things. So, any other questions about that? Well, you can ask me anytime. My email address is on the list, and I have office hours on Tuesdays and Wednesdays between 12 and 1. I have my office hours. Or if you need another time, you can TBA me, email me, and we can arrange for something. And you can actually even meet by Zoom or Meets if you can't make it to an actual meeting for some reason. So so therefore there's more flexibility in that thing. Okay? Now, we're done with the bureaucracy, right? The bureaucratic aspect of the course. And I see we're kind of not at 20 students, 19. We're kind of weak here. We're not even 18. We're 4 short of 18. Because if you have every seat filled, it'll be 18. So again, go students. Students who are, no, there are go students. You have people who disappear. Trust me, last semester for the MA course, I only had 2, in a class I had supposed to have 10 students, only 2 students ever came to the class. Okay, so that's the joke about that, the go students. I think that's the way it goes. Okay. I did this. This is the syllabus. I did that. Thanks for telling me about that. I'll have to fix that. But if I fix that, what's going to happen? I know what's going to happen. If I add any more names to the list here, right? It's going to knock out number 2, and it's going to go to page 3. So I think that's why I was fighting. I wanted to not waste paper. Okay, I'm trying to not waste paper and have 3-page syllabuses because that's kind of a waste of paper, a 3-page syllabus in a sense. I'm not Mr. Ecology, but even I understand that it's better to use one paper. It is simply better to use one page, for a 2-page syllabus, and that if you have a 3-page, like my big problem here is my other class had that problem. It had a 3-page syllabus. That means there's a blank page at the end of it. And I couldn't get out of that because of that class was a little more pain in the ass because it's more detailed in terms of advanced reading. So therefore, that's what. Again, all the readings here are basic readings. There's nothing really kind of advanced. You're getting a little bit of the Aristotle, who's the founding father of modern political science, not modern political science. And I'm giving you Machiavelli, again, who's the father of, we can say he is the inventor of the modern state and modern politics. He's totally rejecting, even though he in many ways utilizing Aristotelian language and Aristotelian frames, he's overturning it, he's overturning it. Hobbes would be more radical. I didn't have time. I didn't want to make it too complicated. I'll talk about Hobbes, but I'm not going to have you read Hobbes. Leviathan is a very difficult book. And that's going to be on what's out here. But we'll talk about the aspect of these things. So I can kill, hold on, I can kill this. And this is this. Okay. What is politics? That is a question. What is politics? People often, we live in a world where the concept of what politics is very confused. Because we confuse politics with coercion completely. Either it's politics is this bridge. Politics is a type of rule. It deals with ruling. Okay. What is rule? What is rule? We say, well, what is rule? Rule is a situation where one is either having authority over, controlling, or leading others, okay? This concept of leadership, we say, leadership is a form of rule, okay? But there's idea of rule means that someone is in charge, someone has authority over you, not even to say, authority is a nice word to say it, right? They can command you. Now, the way you can command is many ways. I can do so by force, coercion, physical force, coercion. I can do so by shared agreement, that we can agree to it, by utilizing what's useful to you. Agreeing, you want something, okay, you want something, I have access to it, I will give it to you if you do it, right? Exchange, right? That's economic, okay? The idea of economic, sharing utility, a shared sense of utility, or I am exchanging your labor for my effort, okay? My goods, or either my protection, even, okay? I'm going to protect you. You want safety? Good, I'm the big monster guy with a sword and kill people for fun. You're just the little farmer. You need someone, people coming and robbing you all the time and stealing your food and stealing your cattle. You pay me to do what? To kill to kill and hunt down the people stealing your animals and things like this. And what you do to me is you pay me money. Feed me. Keep me happy. And I protect you. That's the basic organization of what the kind of economic activity. But there is also what? Okay, I can persuade. We'll talk about this a little next week as well. But Weber, the very famous German sociologist Max Weber, argued that one form of rule is kind of like he talked about his three traditional concepts of authority and rule. The German word Herrenschaft, rule. Herrenschaft, rule. How does rule? What are the authorities? He talks about Traditional, which is customary. We do it because our ancestors did it a certain way. We have certain habits, right? And who rules us is the habit we have had. So therefore, over time, we have a system of this. Our eldest warrior is our ruler, or we gather together. The farmers gather together to elect a council. Okay, that is habit, custom. That is one mechanism of who determines what is rulership, custom, authority, tradition. The next level of this is the more modern. It's called rationalistic, legalistic. In other words, you start, instead of looking at how the customs and habits, you apply who rules based upon a kind of rationalistic or legalistic framework. He rules because this is the law, and the paper says he's in charge, and therefore, this is we rationally made this set of rules. He or she is in charge. She has this authority, he has that authority. Right? That's rationalistic, legalistic. The last characteristic, the third characteristic he talked about, and I'll talk about this again, charismatic. People are, what is charisma? Charisma is attractiveness. This idea of people's attractiveness. Somebody has a characteristic. Now, it's the eye of the beholder. Some people may look at people and be, what some people will say is charismatic, other people will be turned off by. Again, this is subjective in that sense. Charisma is an attraction. You are attracted to it. And this person, because of the person's attractiveness, you feel, and this can be a sense of that you feel he has power. You feel he has authority. You feel that he or she is, and this is usually, you notice this in religious groups or religious organizations, people like a priest who can get, a priest or a spiritual leader who can get followers because of something about their personality, their person, the way they talk, the way they act, attracts people, okay? Charisma, okay? Now, Joseph Nye in the 1990s came up with a concept for politics called soft power. And I always argue that's, his concept of soft power is the biggest mushy idea in the world, because it ends up people saying, oh, business is soft power. Branding is soft power. And I go, yeah, branding is soft power. Yes, what is branding? It is taking things that people like, taking a thing, giving it an identification of something that attracts people or repels people, right? So it is a form of charisma. So soft power is, the logic of soft power is the logic of charisma. Attractiveness. It has no real power. Any power is about, hard power is about carrots and sticks. Do you know what a carrot and stick is?
Yeah.
What is a carrot and stick?
Carrot and stick, I think something like a bait.
Okay, a carrot is what?
Something to convince someone to do something.
In other words, it's benefit, some kind of benefit. If I offer you money for a job, a wage, that's a carrot, right? A stick is, I'm going to hit you, of course. But not only, the stick is not necessarily only the physical force, but it's also what? The threat of the physical force. The fact that I have a stick and I can use it, and I point the stick at you and saying, behave. Okay? Bullying is a form of hard power. In fact, to be a good leader, you have to bully. Be able to bully. To get people what you want them to do, sometimes you have to bully them. Hard power. Economic activity is hard power. This is one of the nonsenses you hear in a lot of IR departments. Oh, business relationships is soft power. No, it's hard power. Money is a form of a carrot or a stick. Money can be a stick also. How? I take it away from you. I threaten to take away your salary or your job or your resources. I can give you resources, I can take away your resources. That's hard power. Soft charisma here is, why do I mention this? Charisma here is important because to understand charisma is you have to understand the nature of kind of rule. Okay. So therefore we lead us to a question. Well, what is rule? Rule is this kind of idea of having authority over other people. Why do you have authority over other people? Well, it could be, like I said, we've agreed to it. This is something we've agreed to over time. Or something that we have rationally, something that by the nature of some rational principle of organization necessity. Some functions have to be done, so therefore we need someone to do it. And therefore the reality of this structure requires there needs to be someone in charge, so we put someone in charge. What defines the nature of ruler and ruled? Rule implies someone who is ruling, and then the opposite is that someone is ruled. If I was being completely nasty to you, I'd make you read famous Hegel's The Phenomenology of Spirit, his famous master-slave dialectic, that this idea that all through human history that there is this tension between this tension, bipolar relationship between a master or the ruler and the subject or the slave. Okay, in all human history there is this. In fact, Marx takes Hegel's concept here and turns it into class struggle. He takes this idea of the master-slave dialectic as the engine of freedom. That when none are free, one is free, few are free, more are free, most are free, all are free, right? That's human history in that sense, this master-slave dialectic moving all through time and space. Karl Marx takes this and materializes in terms of class. So you have with the rise of kings, you have the rise of the aristocrats versus the peasants. So the lords versus peasants, right? Then you have the rise of the capitalist class. You have the bourgeoisie, which is the merchants and the owners versus the workers, right? And then the idea is that there's going to be the revolution, and that the revolution is going to make sure it's going to be a proletarian revolution. So the workers of the world are going to unite, and they're going to be in charge. But Lenin said, no, that doesn't really work that way. Why? Because you need leaders. And what are leaders? Leaders are elites. So that's a very big problem in all societies, between the many and the few. The many are the opulent, the plebs and the nobles, right? This is always going to be the many and the great. In fact, this is what the tension between classes, between the few and the many, the rich, the poor, the vulgar and the noble, the ugly and the beautiful. Remember that. Hate to say this, attraction, physical beauty, and height are usually signs of leadership. Ugly people, short people lose in power structures. And if you put a situation of putting people together in a choice and having people choose who you're going to vote or choose to follow, tall people and pretty people win. Sad fact, but that's the nature of human animals. Okay? And that is a reality of politics in that sense. The beautiful, the Greeks argued that the good, the true, and the beautiful are one. Now we all know that it's not true. We know that there can be beautiful people who are very bad people. Okay, because there is not this unity of in other words, there's a disunity of these virtues, not a complete unity of the virtues. So therefore, in fact, that's the whole problem. Aristotle would argue, and Aristotle gets in trouble for this, but if the world is simple, right, and if it's simple, there should be natural rulers and natural slaves. The natural slave is what? The person who simply lacks the ability of forethought. If you do not have the ability to make good judgments, and you don't necessarily know how to make the assessment of judgment, you don't know how to act properly, or to even know how to survive or live well, you need someone to rule you. Like a child needs to be ruled. Children don't come out of life without the ability to know how to survive and how to live well. So the idea is that there is an inherent natural ruler and ruled. But the problem with this is what? It's very difficult for us to... Now, if everyone saw that this person is better, we would follow them. If it was everyone saw it and everyone agreed to it. The problem is we don't see everyone. We don't see the person as a natural better. We don't believe it. We doubt it. And because we doubt their superiority, in other words, we don't see that they are so better than us that we should obey them. We don't see this. And this is why the human animal has a problem. Now, ants, come on. You know how ants work, don't you? How do ants communicate? Does anyone know?
Through pheromones.
Pheromones and chemicals. Therefore, they know exactly, when they communicate, they know who's in charge and who's not. Who's the ruler? It's instantaneous, perfect information. We don't communicate perfectly. We communicate very imperfectly. We had to create language because our ability to communicate non-verbally is imperfect. Other animals communicate more perfectly than us because either they communicate through chemistry, or by just aspects of domination. Again, chemistry, pheromones. Dominance and leadership. Dogs, come on. The alpha dog is the dog who is able by his physical strength and dominance over the other animals to lead. And the other dogs will know, but simply by his presence, the dog, usually it's his dog, his odor, his pheromones will tell the other dogs, I'm in charge here. Now, sometimes there's another dog who thinks it's competitive. What happens? They will fight, and what will end up happening is, at the end of the day, the dominant dog wins. Now, what happens? What happens when you lose a fight? Your chemistry changes. In other words, you've lost, and what happens? You don't get, winning animals get the sense of endorphins. Come on, when you play a video game, when you win, what happens? You get an endorphin high. You get that kick of an endorphin high. Bang, bang, bang. You feel great. And you lose, what happens? You have that negative endorphin. No. Winning and losing sets chemicals in our brain. Happy, sad. Happy, sad. When we lose, do bad, what happens? We get depressed, don't we? This is the biochemistry of human achievement and failure. And at animal levels, that helps determine dominance and submission. Humans are not that simple because why? Because even someone who's depressive can still nevertheless be a formidable leader in a legalistic sense or traditional sense. In other words, human beings have developed levels of society, social networks and social structures that are above our natural biological structures. And they are just as evolutionary as the biological structure. In fact, they impact and affect them. One of the concepts is mastery and despotism. To be despotic means to be ruled by a master. Slavery. Slavery is the #1 form of human association. Let's have no foolishness about this. Slavery is one of those little things that have been with human existence and human being as far as human beings can remember. And because of this, what is this? The nature of the master-slave relationship is what? Coercion, right? Because who's the benefit? Now, think of this. The ruler is the master, the subject is the slave, right? Who benefits in this relationship?
Master.
Master. The slave serves the interest of the master. Okay, that's the nature of slave rule. An economic rule, for economic rule, trade to happen, what has to happen? Despotic relationships are coercive, and the benefit always favors the masters. Okay, economic activity is not mastery; it's the opposite of mastery. Why?
Because there has to be an exchange.
Yep, and therefore, the exchange is completely yes, and both parties have to be satisfied. And if one party says no, the exchange doesn't happen. So you need both parties to perceive benefit. They have to believe they're benefiting. If they're not both benefiting, then there's no exchange, right? There's no shared utility. So it's completely voluntary. In other words, economic activity and despotic relationships are opposites of each other, complete opposites. Everyone must benefit in an economic, both parties, remember, that's the problem. Economics is really a two-party relationship. And then what is the larger economics is nothing more than the aggregation of those aspects of exchange. In other words, every economic activity, the basic thrust of an economic activity is exchange. And then what is larger economic activity? All the different levels of exchange that grows from that, the aggregation of it. Every activity is at root, every economic activity is an exchange. I'm producing something, right? I hire workers, that's an exchange. I pay you wage, you work in my thing. I buy products, I buy goods. Every relationship is a form of trade, an exchange. What it is a complex level of aggregation. So this is what's wrong with a lot of Marxist theory. They think economics is despotism. It's coercive. No, economics cannot be, because the second it becomes, it ceases to be economics. Now you can say, but wait a minute, people get expectations of things. And what about they're being cheated? That really they don't know what their own good is. Well, okay, yes. And this is the problem with economics. Economics doesn't cheat. In other words, the exchange doesn't happen because this is your good. It's because each party believes it's good. In exchange, both parties can think they're cheating the other side. We're selling something, right? And then she's thinking, oh my God, he should charge me a lot more for that. And I'm thinking, oh no, I'm robbing her blind. Okay? Because why? It's the value of a thing is completely subjective. The Marxists believe that value is objective. Again, that's because they follow John Locke and his labor theory of value, that the amount of labor you put into an effort or a work determines its value. Nonsense. The value is merely subjective. It's every person will value something differently. And what happens is the only way we assess the price of a value is what? The level it will be exchanged for. What other people will pay for the thing. We have things. I don't have it with me. I have a watch that I have at home that was given by my grandfather. It's very old. I would never sell it. Because why? I would say, okay, someone have to give me like $100,000 to sell it. But if you went to someone else and looked at it and say, oh, it's only worth $200, $300, or maybe $500, okay? In other words, why? It's subjective. It's not the value we put onto things is not necessarily tied to the reality what other people pay for things. Now this comes to the problem of despotic relationships. Power rules of this, okay? Now the three readings we had today was Lord about leadership, talks about why modern leadership is still available. He's trying to justify leadership. Kenneth Montague's famous little introduction book, very short introduction to politics, very short introduction. He's very much a classic liberal, and his argument here wants to talk about what rule is, and then he talks about citizenship, right? What is citizenship? Citizenship is the basis of politics. In fact, in the Greek, the word citizen comes from the word polis. And what is the polis? The polis is we would say city, but it means more than city, because it means this is the space where politics happens. The political, the politikos, polis, same very connected word. Yes.
In Polish we call it państwo, miasto, so
well,
country, city.
No, but it's more complicated. Państwo literally means, in a sense, like patria. It's
Yeah,
not.
I
It's
just mean that when we explain polis in, let's say, high school or something, we learn that it's.
well, it's a very complicated question because sometimes it's translated as state.
City,
Yeah. It's mistranslated as you can translate it as city because that's because the Roman word for it is civitas. The Greek would be polis. The Latin version of that word, they would call it civitas. And we get the word civic from it. That of a citizen. Okay? Civic means that this is the space of citizens. Okay? This is the language of politics. Now, we have to move here to the next problem. The next problem is if mastery is one aspect of it. Now let's go to the dangerous realm of feminism. What is the nasty big bugbear that every feminist teacher will talk about? What is the big threat that we live under? Patriarchy! Which means what?
The rule of men.
But it really means the rule of fathers. Patriarcha, the patriarch, the father. Okay? But it also comes from paternalism. Paternal, what does that mean? Parents. Both are the thing of that. Now, what is patriarchy? And this is where feminists, like any radical, likes to lie. They lie by redefining terms. What is patriarchy? The rule of the fathers. Not the rule of men, the rule of the fathers. Okay? What does a father do?
Decide about everything?
Well, yeah, he decides, but what is his purpose? What does he care for?
His family.
His child, right? He works for the sake of his child. He loves his child, right? Why does he rule his child? He rules his child not because he wants to impose his will. This is the Nietzschean, everything's a will to power. Everything's about power, power, power. Every relationship is power. Men and women, it's all power. Language is power. Nonsense. Once you say that, then what you've done is basically said we're all a bunch of, we're all like the Hobbesian state of nature. We're all fighting each other, trying to dominate each other, and trying to use coercion on each other. It's the war of all against all, which is not, Hobbes said in his Leviathan, is nasty, cruel, brutish, and short. No, it's not about care, love. Parents love their child. They should love their children. Now, in other words, this idea that fathers abuse their children, well, yes, but is that the norm or the exception? Or not a better word. Is it the norm or the deviation? Is abuse the norm or the abuse of the relationship? It's the abuse. We don't judge a thing by its norm. We today judge its things by what we want to judge it by. Therefore, they judge it by the abuse. Patriarchy is about care. The care of the father or the mother to the child. It's love. Who's benefiting in that relationship?
Both sides.
No. The primary beneficiary is who?
The child.
The child. If there's benefits to the parents, it's only because the child will survive in the future. Right? It has in other words, its benefit is not immediate, its benefit is in the future. When they are weak and older, maybe their children will care for them, right? They're investing in their children. In other words, it's not an immediate care, a profit or utility. It is the benefit of the child and hope that the child will be a good child, will remember that they cared for them when they were young and they provided for them and made that their life was possible, that they will now care for them. I also like to remember, we thank God we're not Romans, because the Roman father had, I think the reason why feminism happens, the fear of the father is tied to the Roman father. Because the Roman father had the right to kill his children, even when they were old. If you disobeyed your father, he had the right to kill you. That's the father's power. And therefore, if you were like a 50-year-old man and your 80-year-old father was angry with you, he could kill you legally. He had power over your life. Now, the problem with Romans was they couldn't touch women. In other words, the husbands could not touch their wives. Who could touch the wives? Her father. So, if you had a problem with your wife, you couldn't deal with it yourself. You had to go talk to her papa. And usually that meant giving back his money. Giving back the dowry, land or property. You couldn't touch her. Even if she committed adultery in a Roman situation. You had to get her parents. If there was no father left with a brother, then the older brother would take charge. Her siblings. And do they have an economic interest in you divorcing? Yes. So therefore, it's going to be very complicated. Roman culture was very complicated. And I think a lot of our fear of fathers, the word in Roman for rule of the king is rex. The Greek word for rex is basileus, the king, right? The king in Latin is rex. Well, the famous in Greek, the famous story of Oedipus. Oedipus is Oedipus Tyrannus, the tyrant, right? In Latin, he's called Oedipus Rex. The attitude of most Latins and Romans to the king is identical to the Greeks to the tyrant. And that is because of the fear of the father. So that's something we'll talk about next class in that sense. But parental rule will be here. And political rule is what? Political rule is this middle ground. It's not completely economic. It's not trade. It's not care. Care is there, but it's not complete care. Because what? Care just means I love you and I'm sacrificing to you. The problem is politics is that politics requires both parties. Politics is like economics. Everyone has to benefit. The ruler and ruled share in benefit. If rulers benefit and ruled don't in a political form, it ceases to be political, it becomes despotic. The less the rule participate in benefit, the more despotic the relationship is. But the difference between politics and economics political life a lot of political life is involuntary. You don't choose. You don't choose to be, like, a lot of paternal life is not choosing either. That's another thing. Paternal life is not even chosen. In fact, we could even say love is not chosen, because most people are sexually attracted to other people because of pheromones. That, you're attracted to people because, why? Because you're lacking genes. You are lacking genes, and what happens is the person with the pheromones are this mechanism of saying what genes you have. It's televising your genes. And what happens is you're receiving it and you're saying, I don't have these genes. Ooh, I want them. Now you're not thinking that, but the evolutionary process within you is that. So that is what sexual attraction really is. It's this weird combination of some chemical reaction based upon pheromones, receptions of pheromones. And the other mechanism is simply just because the other sexual attraction is sexual availability, okay? In other words, certain signals are being sent. Now, this doesn't mean they want sex, but there's certain human characteristics that are certain signs of saying that I am available. Doesn't mean you want to have sex, it's that or even desire it in that sense of your choice of it. But you are still, because of life and the situation of your body at the time of things, everyone is sending, and men are, how can I say this? Women are cyclical sexually, men are like, that's why we have eyes, you know the story about why my males are, women pornography is stories, Hulk and romances. Male pornography is visual. Why? What in human evolution led to the need to know visual? In fact, when we were apes, when we were earlier apes, you could actually know what woman was ovulating and what woman wasn't. Why? Because if you're on all fours and you're hunched over, and if someone is, ovulating, what does that mean? It means their genitals are going to be engulfed, and it's going to be exposed. It's going to be obvious when we're naked in the animal kingdom. So therefore, the animal who knows, the animal who can, the ape who was able to see which one of the women who were ovulating and impregnate her would be the successful one. That's why human beings have evolved, male human beings evolved visual mechanisms of sexual arousal. And then when we went from 4 legs to 2 legs, what happened? It became harder. You couldn't know. That's why big breasts became a sexual thing, because it looked like behinds. Again, this is the mechanisms of why evolution occurred, changing in other words, the way we evolved as human beings from 4 to 2 led to the reason why the males have their sexual patterns of behavior and women have theirs. This is why evolution operates at certain levels. This also explains why, what? It explains a lot of things about human behavior and human activity. It also explains why we have, back to the question of, I'll stop there. I want to go to the second thing. We'll talk about this question of place, political community, the problem of political community. We'll talk about that a little bit next week. This is the political anthropology. This is the famous evolution of human anthropology. Human beings in their evolution, we started the rise of hunter-gatherers. As we develop, we become hunter-gatherers. This is what? Hunter-gatherers is the earliest stage of development. Hunter-gatherers can't really, in other words, you have to keep on moving. You can't really stay in, the hunter-gatherers, you have to follow the animals, and then what? You have to also find local the shrubs or the fruit or the grains that are at hand, gathering like mushrooms and things like this. The food off that it's not cultivated; it's naturally occurring. Hunter-gatherers gather; they don't create crops. This leads, as Thurston Veblen in his classic theory of leisure class, he argues that this also divides the class relationship. Gender and class emerges out of the hunter-gatherer society. Hunters tend to be who? Men. Gatherers tended to be women and children. Who has higher status? The hunters. That created the status and class structure and dominant structure within hunter-gatherer society. Now, hunter-gatherer society goes in two different ways, many ways. One level of hunting gathering is seafaring, fishing. First, hunting in the rivers, looking for hunting in the water. First, spearing fish in the water, but then coming up with new techniques to catch fish and other sea life to eat. It starts as hunting, it moves to the herding of shepherding, right? You can argue that the fishing follows the shepherding. Shepherding is what? At first we hunt the animals that move, then the second we find animals that we cultivate and control, like sheep, rams, goats, and things like that we follow, we feed them off the land, we move with the land. These tend to be nomadic peoples, right? They're still nomadic. Hunter-gatherers nomadic and shepherding nomadic. It's a kind of farming, but it's not a farming. It's farming animals. You farm the herd. At hunter-gatherer and shepherding, you say that same thing. The sea hunting life, the sea life is the same thing. You learn to shepherd the sea animals. So hunter-gatherers and sea, you see that. See, the last one in hunter-gatherers is the hunting of men. Piracy, hunting of men. You know, you can hunt them to work, to use them, to force them to slaves, or you can kill them because you want their property, you want their territory, you're competing for resources. So this aspect of hunting. So hunting, the second level is we call it the rise of nomadic populations, and then we get farming. And what happens with farming? Property emerges with farming. In other words, the property of the other above are either their animals or their physical goods. Land is not property. It's when you become once you start cultivating land for farming, culture, then you take property of land. It is with the rise of farming you move from one stage of development to another stage. That's a big move. And then therefore you start having this idea that the property becomes important. Because why? Your property is tied to your survival. And then the next level of development is, again, follows like someone like Adam Smith or Ferguson's famous line in his essay on civil society. These 4 stages of cultural development. Next is the rise of commerce, commercial society, trade. And that includes what? The rise of industry as a form of trade. Production and mass production. So these are the kind of evolutionary things of aspect of political anthropology. But then we take another element, the units of cooperation. The units of cooperation are clearly framed within, we start with the initial stages, the family. Husband, spouse, wife, spouse, pair bond. Children. Then what happens? Grandchildren. Cousins, uncles relationship, brothers' relations, brother-sister relationships. cousin relationship, then intergenerational. Within a very short period of time, what was simply just two become 3 levels, become 4 levels, become 5, 6 levels within 2 or 3 cycles of generation cycles. So we move from, that's one aspect of family, base one. Then the next one is the band. What is the band? The band is not necessarily familiar. A group of men who gather together for hunter-gathering purposes. The band. The band is the first moment. You see the band emerges both in hunter-gathering societies and in less so much in nomadic populations. Nomadic tend to be more complicated. The village. Now the village happens when? The next stage. It is association of different populations. The band and the village are 2 separate stages. Usually villages only occur with agrarian life. Why? Settlement. And that therefore it becomes the minimum necessary for people to start. In other words, different farmers, different agrarian communities this becomes the minimum mechanism of exchange and services. Where therefore, usually with villages, you also arise some level of commerce, some level of small level of trade, usually trade of services. The village will have someone who's a ironsmith or some level of smith or some level of animal husbandry command to help or assist. Sometimes it will be different farms, different estates, different farming estates will have a person who has this guy and this person won't have one of those. So what they do is they exchange services. They have something what they don't, and this network of exchange becomes a village tied to a land area. The next level is the clan, which is what? Kin groups. In other words, the same people, the same clan group, usually associating with each other, intergenerational. And then that leads to the tribe, which is basically the extension of the family. If the clan is an extension of the family, the tribe is an extension of the clan. A tribe may have different roots of the same family line. Different clans of the same family forms the nation, which becomes the tribe or people. The Latin word would be genus, genum. The English we would say nation. The French would say nation, and that's where we get the word nation from. The tribes, the nation. This is homogeneous. This is a population who share the same family connections. And last but not least, there is this last development, the empire. We'll talk about this next class, the household, the tribe, and the empire. Because the tribe and the empire becomes a very important moment. Because what is the empire? The empire is usually one tribe conquering another tribe or other tribes. Therefore, it is really the first attempt to create largest, what we call homogeneous rule, because all tribes tribes are always homogeneous. That means same kin group. An empire is not homogeneous. The empire is usually heterogeneous. That it usually have multiple different tribes, different peoples. It tends to be different. It tends to have an empire will mostly be composed of different ethnic populations. The empire always relies. Okay, if we'll talk about tribes, tribes are held together by family, kin group relationships. Empires are usually held together by force, coercion. They're held together only by force and coercion to a great degree. And then what do? They create things. This is where I should have included, in my readings I will include this. This would be the essay from Michel Gosset's Primitive Religion, and the origin of the state. Now, he talks about the origin of the state, but the rise of the large empires, the creation of empire, which is multi-tribe. If you look at human development, these great empires, the Assyrian, the Egyptians, you name it. This, I mean, the early ones, not the later Egyptian, but the earlier Egyptian. The Incas, the Mayas, the Aztecs, right? You look at these large civilizational, these moments of these multi-tribal populations where one tribe or one leader or one war leader is able to unify all these tribes under this. And then what does he do? Well, he needs religion. He creates a religion usually. A religion is created. They create religion. They create what? They create a great big giant buildings to glorify the empire or the ruler. What else they build? Law, rules, and also written languages. Tribal people don't create written languages. Tribal people keep oral language. It's with the rise of empire do you get what? With the empire do you get written language, established religion. Tribal people tend to have very primitive religion. Now, remember this. What happens when an empire, a tribe, connects with an empire, then leaves? Does it forget everything it learned from the empire? No. It will take over things. It will take written language. It will take law. It will take these institutions with them. So once in other words, tribes in their pre-imperial form, without getting to that stage, if you look at tribes who've never been near or connected to an empire, what happens? Like pygmies, or you go to a lot of Southeast Asia and some parts of Africa, you go to a tribe, you'll see primitive religion. You look at these tribal peoples who have not been incorporated into an imperial structure. Primitive peoples who have tended not to have been incorporated or tend to have been left alone. What happens? You can see all the traits of early human development. Then what happens? What happens is that once you have an empire, you get things like religion, organized religion, priests. Tribal religions tend not to have formal priests. They tend to be just family elders, ancestor worship, and things like this. Empires get organized religion, a priest class. The creation of class of people who do certain functions. Then what you do is you have the same problem with here. You have the functionality of empires being based upon coercion, right? It's based on force. But what happens when the force can't keep, the empire can't, if the empire can no longer maintain the force keeping everything together, what happens? The empire falls apart. And what happens? Well, people tend to revert back to tribal relationships. This is what happened in Europe after the collapse of the Roman Empire. Everything reverted to the pre-tribal relationships and the local languages. But what happened? Certain Roman institutions stayed. The church, the Roman Catholic Church, which was remember the Roman Emperor Constantine unified it, it was spread through the empire. So the Christendom was spread. The church in the West was an last imperial institution. With it, Roman law. What would tribal leaders would use Roman law to settle disputes? They would look at Roman titles and claims as a mechanism to justify their claims. Look at the way feudal Europe worked. Feudal Europe reverted back to household and tribal rule. The only institutions that were left were the households or the estates under Roman law, and what? The various tribal leaders, the re-emerging tribal leaders. And what did the tribal leaders do? Try to justify their rule in the church. That's the other thing, these church institutions. And all these things start to cooperate and they create the feudal system. Okay? In other words, feudalism of Europe emerged out of the collapse of empire. So therefore you have, but what about politics? Well, politics also, the polis emerged at the time. If you there was a great European empire, Atlantis. They thought the question of Atlantis, right? There was one time the Mediterranean was ruled by one people. The survivors of that are the Carthage and the thing. There was a huge population that unified everything, and then some disaster happened. Probably the Black. You know what the Black Sea was? The Black Sea was originally a freshwater sea, and then the land of the Dardanelles opened up, and then the seawater from the Mediterranean went into the Black Sea. So the Great Flood. Well, this Great Flood destroyed an empire. And what happened? Well, what happened was that all these people were totally interconnected. If you look at the Greeks and the Greeks had Greece had no real farmland. It was all hill land. It was like mountainous terrain. You didn't have long valleys. So you couldn't have big estates. You had to have small estates, small communities. And that and if you notice about the Greeks, so they didn't have the same ethnicity. There was very multiple clearly different ethnic groups within what is Greek, Ionian, Theban. You have the whole series. Because why? What happened was during empires, ethnic groups tend to merge together. Look at Eastern Europe. Eastern Europe is a perfect example. Under Russia and under Austria, what happened? These Austrian and Russian empires merged populations together. So you didn't have clear homogeneous environments. You had massive interpenetration of different ethnic groups. So empires tend to be very heterogeneous and hold together by coercion. And what happens when it collapses? Well, things will try to revert back to homogeneous structures of ethnicity, but sometimes, like places like Greece and the Mediterranean, it was very difficult because the geography of Greece made it very difficult for you to simply move populations and have all this ethnicity. So you had this weird situation where you had different, they divided along ethnic lines, but they grouped next to each other within very spatial characteristics. Like next to Peloponnese were moved by not the Ionians. The Ionians tended to stay on the sea areas. The Peloponnesian population tended to have 2 or 3 different ethnicities. They're the Spartans and the what do you call it? The people that the Spartans enslaved, and then the Corinthians. These are 3 different major Peloponnesian populations. 2 were very advanced, one was very backwards, and the Spartans enslaved the backward one. The northern mountains of Greece had more different Thebans and other groups, the Laosians, and then the Macedonians on the hills, and going into the Slavic areas today, where we call Yugoslavia, the Yugoslavia areas. So what does that mean? This meant that something emerges. This interpenetration of these structures led to a particular development, what we call the birth of the political. The polis emerges. The polis is very interesting. Why? Because the polis it wasn't a village in that say, because it wasn't merely a product of families. It was, the polis could be it could be homogeneous, but it also could be very heterogeneous. If you know the stories of Rome and the stories of Athens, these are not Athens and Rome are not homogeneous ethnic populations. So cities could be either like polises could be either construed of populations that were homogeneous in their characteristic or heterogeneous in their characteristic. There was aspects of voluntarism into it, but it was also at a certain level, after the first initial stages, it tends to be involuntary. In other words, the next generation is born into it, and therefore there's less choice. The founding generation, there's choice, but after the founding generation, there tends not to be choice. Okay, there tends to be people who are born into it. Citizenship is what? Shared rule. The concept of politics is that all members of this are sharers. Now, I don't make you read this because this is a little too complicated. It would be Frederick Maitland's argument is that the corporation, he argues that the state and the corporation are very much interconnected. And I think, and actually Samuel Feiner, one of the great political science, his famous multi-volume history of government, Samuel Feiner in his history of government argues that the polis is kind of like a joint stock company. In other words, every citizen is a joint owner. And it's it's not one share, one vote. It's one man, one share of the vote. Every citizen is a joint stockholder of this thing that they own together. Therefore, in other words, every citizen is both ruler and ruled. Every citizen is a ruler. He is a joint, but the problem here is that the ruler is all of them together. So therefore, you need some custom, some law that establishes, well, when do you get to rule? And the argument is you need to know, in order to be a good ruler, the citizen argues, you need to know how to be ruled. So therefore, as a child, you're not a ruler. Rulers tend to be the people, once they mature and they hit age, they're allowed to go to the forum, they participate in public debate. All citizens gather together and deliberate together, and they make decisions together. And they will elect and choose people to execute certain functions and duties. This is political rule. Political rule is a form of a situation where those who share the liberation of the goods of the city. So what is politics? Following this, this is the famous, the last essay, and I'll just do it, is the famous little essay by How to Understand Politics by First Things, August, September 2000, by Harvey Mansfield. He goes, well, the problem is politics is really about who should rule. Who should rule? Now, he says the problem is that contemporary politics don't like this question. Instead, they're more concerned about following the topic, political science inspired by Harold Laswell's classic, 36 classic, who gets what, when, and how. So today, most political science cares about who gets things. What do you get? In other words, it's all about economics. Distribution of goods and services, or goodies. The classical politics understood who's ruling, who's in charge, and the relationship between who's in charge and the question of benefits, and the question of who's benefiting. Is it the ruler benefiting? Because this is the problem. Kingship and paternal care, the rule should benefit. The ruled should benefit, not the ruler. It's care. The principal concept of paternal rule is care. Care is what? Like love. It benefits the beloved. It benefits the person being cared for. Is politics care? Not completely. Politics requires that the ruler and rule must mutually benefit. If only the subject benefits, that's care. That's how kingship should be. Kingship is like fatherhood. It should be ruled for the sake of the ruled. The king should sacrifice his good. He should sacrifice himself for the sake of the subject. Kingship is sacrifice. Mastery is domination and benefit. Okay? Economics is simply just voluntary. Voluntary exchange, and it has no coercion at all. Politics is weird because politics looks like economics, and that both sides must benefit, right? It's the ruler and rule must mutually benefit. But it's different. It admits coercion. It's not complete coercion. If it becomes complete coercion, it becomes what? Despotic, right? It needs coercion. Why? Because there are bad people out there. People are going to want to break people. There's going to be people who don't want to play the game, don't want to play fair. You need to protect people. You need law. What is law? Okay, what is the difference between law and justice? Very simple. Law is a particular community's view of what is just with teeth. The sword. Law comes with, it is a form of justice that is armed. It has, like orthodoxy. Orthodoxy is true opinion. It's opinion that is not necessarily armed, but law is a form of orthodoxy, an opinion about justice of the community, but it's armed. If you break the law, there will be consequences. Punishment. Coercion. Anytime you use, like taxing, if I'm taxing you, anytime I use law, laws are sticks. The threat of coercion is always present. Anytime you make a law, and this is why I hate stupid idiots like Mayor Bloomberg, where he made illegal the 32-ounce cups, 32-ounce cups of soda. Or once you make a 32-ounce cup of soda illegal, the people who then continue selling 32-ounce cups of sodas are now what? Criminals breaking the law. So what the police must do? Arrest them. And what do you do to arrest somebody? You use coercion. Do always people go along being arrested? No. And by the way, who tend to be the people who tend to sell products that don't obey the law? Minorities. Immigrants and minorities. So all of a sudden you started to have all these laws because of things like, I don't want you to sell food of this kind or sell that or that. They have to be enforced. So what happens? The police enforces the law, and first you get a guy who refuses to do it. You say he's Mr. I forget that guy. He was the guy. He refused to comply with the policeman. This black man who was selling soda out of his truck and selling stuff out of a thing. He was breaking the law. The policeman arrested him. He refused. He struggled with the policeman. The policeman had to use force. I mean, you have to arrest them. That means you have to put them in handcuffs. If they don't put themselves in handcuffs, what happens? They fight with you the whole time. You have to stop them. So you end up using a baton on them. And then someone takes a picture of that. Oh my God, look at these white, and sometimes they weren't, they're Hispanic policemen, beating up black people. Well, if you didn't have the stupid law about not selling food or that, then a lot of these people the policemen would not be arresting these people for these crimes. Every time you make a law, you are saying the use of force is required to uphold it. Anytime you make a tax, what is tax? Tax is not voluntary. What happens if you refuse the tax? Pay a tax. The authorities of the state can use coercive means to take your money. And if you resist, they can arrest you, hurt you, maybe even kill you to make you comply. So this political life is not completely without coercion. The problem here is the coercion must be, we're going to go right now. Coercion is, what is the question you had? You had a question?
No, I just
You know, it's our time. The coercion is for the sake of the common benefit. If the coercion is upholding the system and the laws really benefit all, then we have to say that coercion is acceptable. But if that coercion is only being done to maintain power or the benefit of one group at the expense of another, then that means the system is becoming despotic, okay? So we'll stop here. I'm sorry I went over. We will see each other next week, and we'll continue